I've been working in the Natural History Museum for 30 years now, and it slowly gets to you after a while that every time you walk through the galleries you actually spot another animal that you didn't realize you had. There are 10,000 exhibits in this museum, so it's hard to have favorites. The public have some favorites, but basically a lot of the animals here are somebody's favorite. And at any time we've ever moved things or taken something off exhibition, we've had a complaint from somebody who always wanted to come here just to look at that one thing. And then the one thing that most people spot when they walk in the door is the giant deer skeletons behind me. They're hard to miss, they're enormous. Big as a horse, the largest deer that ever lived, and the biggest antlers on any animal of all time. They're up to 3 meters, maybe even 4 meters across in the largest examples known. The section of the antler coming out from the skull is as thick as your arm, and that's because it's very, very solid bone carrying a very large weight. If you look at the spine of a male giant deer, there's some spikes sticking up where there would have been a shoulder hump, and that's where all the muscles and tissues that help to lift this enormous head were operating. If you were a giant deer weighing almost 1,000 kilos with feet smaller than half the size of an average adult human's foot, you've got a very small foot that's being pushed in with a very substantial weight. If they wandered into a swampy lakeside area looking for lovely nutritious plants to give them the minerals that they required for their diet, they would run the risk of sinking into that mud. 11,000 years ago they were lakes, today they're peat bogs, and people have been extracting turf for fuel from those bogs for hundreds of years. So you can imagine when many of these giant deer were dug up in the mid-19th century, you had millions of peasants farming the land in a very basic way, harvesting turf for fuel and encountering giant deer. And most of those peasants worked for landlords who were the people who ended up with these magnificent animals in their homes. Well, certainly unusual things do happen. A Natural History Museum is sufficiently unusual a place. We get a lot of inquiries in from the public. Sometimes the thing just smells and sits in a bag. If we're not here and we're away on our holidays, it gets a lot worse. One of my predecessors did get a bat in a jar, and in order to identify it, he unscrewed the jar. He had no idea that the bat was alive, and it took 2 days going around the museum with a net trying to catch that bat. The polar bear in our museum is not just any polar bear. It's actually older than this 1850s museum because it was hunted down and shot by an Irish Arctic explorer. His name was Leopold McClintock. His job was to follow the journey of a group in the Franklin expedition, an ill-fated British endeavour to try to find the Northwest Passage, which was the holy grail of traffic around North America. Franklin and his crew, over 120 people, all died in that expedition, and people like McClintock were sent out for decades afterwards looking for remains of the voyage. McClintock was part of the successful crew that found out what happened to the Franklin expedition. Like all Arctic explorers at the time, they didn't have the backup that you would have today on an expedition. They had to live off their wits, and they had to live off the land as far as they could. And an important part of Arctic exploration was to shoot things, collect them, find out what they're all about, and see if there was enough food by hunting off the land, which of course there wasn't. They didn't realize how sparse the animals were. But animals like polar bears are inquisitive and very dangerous, and they don't go away. So when this polar bear stalked McClintock and his party and hung around their camp, there was no alternative for them but to shoot it. They were using the new thing called a cartridge. They could actually slot a cartridge into their gun and shoot a bullet that would be quite familiar to a lot of people looking at bullets today. This polar bear was shot 11 times. It was finished off with a shot to the head, but earlier shots broke one of the legs. And the skin, if you look closely, is actually got quite a few bullet holes in it. People have asked, would I donate my own body to the museum? And fortunately the answer is no, because the museum wouldn't take it. We don't add human remains to the museum. It's a wildlife museum, although we do have some human remains. Other people have actually done that. There are 19th century individuals whose bodies are preserved in alcohol and whose skeletons are available for public examination. Not something I'd be pursuing.